Greetings, dear viewers. We are happy to welcome you on ALLATRA TV. My name is Anastasia, and my co-hosts are Alexei, Marek, and Jason. And today I feel so honored to introduce our guest speakers, experts, doctors JJ and Desiree Hurtaks. They are social scientists and the founders of Academy of Future Scientists. They are futurists. Dr. JJ Hurtak holds double Ph.D. and he's an author of best-selling book, The Knowledge of Enoch, which is translated to 20 languages. Dr. Desiree Hurtak holds Ph.D. and she's an environmentalist. And they are both well-known film producers and got 15 national and international awards. Doctors Desiree Hurtak and Dr. JJ Hurtak traveled throughout the world and investigated ancient culture. They are respected archaeologists and they worked in Mexico and Egypt. And today they are with us to share their findings and to share their excitement about archaeology.
Thank you very much. We're very honored to be here at this international conversation, bringing together various viewpoints regarding pyramid culture and the understanding of where we are going from this point forward with new discoveries, showing the interconnection between all major cultures, using the pyramid as a symbol of evolutionary growth.
Right, we've had the opportunity of visiting many pyramids around the world and also doing some extensive studies in many of them.
We only have, should we say, the opportunity to talk about a few countries today, but we have essentially covered the world with more than 30 countries that we have visited over the last 45 years, using remote sensing technology, space satellite technology, ground penetrating radar, and of course, we've had the opportunity to actually crawl under the pyramids in the labyrinthian chambers of Giza. So we have produced several interesting studies, very provocative studies, suggesting that the Egyptians were more advanced scientifically than we thought in their use of pyramid culture. So we would like to begin with our work back in the 70s, when I was associated with several scientists involved with what is called this remote viewing, the ability of the mind to see distant objects without the use of physical technology. This technology was developed at Stanford Research Institute in California by my colleagues, Russell Tark, Dr. Harold Pudoff, and Elizabeth Rauscher. And we have had the opportunity to publish extensively on this in terms of a book called Mind Dynamics in Space and Time. But essentially, back in the early 70s, I had the opportunity to look at our sister planet Mars and see various pyramidal formations in the Elysium Quad Triangle, which I brought to the attention of my colleagues at Jet Propulsion Lab in Los Angeles, an affiliate of NASA, prior to the Mariner 9 exploration in 1971-72. And because of the accuracy of my vision, remote viewing, I had the opportunity to acquire the actual pictures of the pyramids of Mars. If you show this.
Right, so in Dr. Hurtak's book, which is actually called The Book of Knowledge, The Keys of Enoch, he was one of the first to come out with this particular publication. It came from the Mariner 9 B-frames from NASA, but he said that there had to be pyramids on Mars. This is something he remote viewed, but also knew about. And you know, back in the time when this was going on, you had also Ingo Swann, who was the top remote viewer, and he and another associate, Harold Sherman, were remote viewing even places like Jupiter. And they said there'll be like crystalline particles found in the atmosphere of Jupiter. And that was before any of the probes. And then shortly after, when the probes went through, they confirmed exactly what was seen. So it's important to realize we have the ability to know more than what our five senses tell us. And that's because we feel that we are part of this global consciousness field. And we feel the pyramids around the world are tapping in. They're part of that consciousness field. I think that's so important to understand.
You mean the pyramids tapping in? You mean pyramids as chronomonitors have the information ability of collecting information according to a vibratory, harmonic, according to other areas that we'll discuss. In essence, I wanted to show the size of the pyramidal landforms.
Yeah, this is actually the first publication, which came out in 1974, I believe it is. Yeah, in terms of Spanish, because that was the one place that could release this information. It's not easy, you know, even now when you talk about the Bosnian Pyramid, for example.
See pyramids here upwards of 300-400 times the volume of the Great Pyramid in Egypt. So they are clearly detached. The mathematical distance between the minor pyramids and major pyramids is maintained. So this is not the result of what we call a supersonic wind burst, megalithic mantle building. No, this indicates a higher degree of creativity.
Right, and so what we're saying is that there was probably a culture on Mars, and we've worked with, as you mentioned, Anastasia, around the world. One of the cultures we worked with was the people of the Zulu Nation in South Africa. And we've done a documentary on Credo Mutwa, who is a famous Zulu shaman. He just passed away in his 90s, literally about a year ago. And he said that his people actually lived on Mars at one point, and then the atmosphere broke apart. And we know that's true because there's even saying today there was probably maybe more water on Mars than there was or is right now on the planet Earth. But because something happened in the atmosphere, and now we know the atmosphere probably cannot hold enough, we'll say, because maybe the magnetic fields have shifted or whatever, that it can't be sustained any longer the way it was. But that's what he said. He said the legends say that they came in Maracaibo from the planet Mars to Africa.
So what does this word mean, Maracaibo? It means the vehicle that was able to take people from one planetary system to another.
And so anyway, that their culture had lived on Mars at one point. And that may be one of the reasons why we have artifacts from what we would say would be a similar culture, but obviously not in our history.
I'm showing you a picture of the Giza Plateau. It was taken in the late 1960s, before excavations have changed the whole frontier of the three major pyramids. What is important here is the ancient Arabic word for Cairo, Egypt, is El-Kahira, which means Mars, or the spacious ones. So I was intrigued as a young student of Egyptology of why the Egyptians would have this connection with pyramids on Mars, and why there would be an etymology, a tradition, more of the metaphysical, that would indicate that one of the greatest civilizations in the ancient world was one time connected with, shall we say, space civilization that may have been extrasolar, that may have been watching the development of humanity tens of thousands, if not millions of years ago.
I think you have some questions for us as well.
Yeah, you kind of already asked the first one we wanted to ask you. So can you maybe be more a little bit go into detail? So what do you think? Why were the pyramids built on Mars, and do they have something in common in sense of geometry with the pyramids on Earth?
Well, absolutely, and in fact, of course, the ones on Mars may be older than what we see on Earth. And even that, it would include the Bosnian Pyramid 36,000 years ago. We're talking about, you know, hundreds of thousands of years ago, maybe even 1 million years ago. And I know that sounds strange, but the more and more we're looking at artifacts around this planet, the more we see that there were really very ancient, we'll say, artifacts, maybe not sophisticated pyramids. I mean, no one's found Atlantis yet, but actually Dr. Hurtak did some work in the area of what would be called Mu. And so that could really go back some, you know, tens of thousands of years. But Mars would actually be a more ancient culture. And that's why we have to look to legends to talk about this. And so why are pyramids important? Well, We're going to be talking about that, of course, throughout this whole conversation, but they do seem to be a structure that is able to survive cataclysmic change. And I think that's number one for structures and building. And then we work very closely with a good friend of ours who did recently also pass away, Patrick Flanagan. And he was the person in the 70s who came out and said, you know, pyramids have energy.
His book was called Pyramid Power, and he showed 1,001 different ways the pyramids could be used as an energy source.
Yeah, and this really has been confirmed over and over and over again, that it's not just an interesting shape, it's not just an interesting tomb. In fact, the ancients, there's a book in the ancient Egyptian Coptic cosmology called Asclepius, and it said that, you know, what was considered temples would be considered tombs. I thought that's really interesting. So these temples, so what's the importance of a temple? I mean, you know, you go in for maybe worship or something like that, but there's an energy there. And I think people start recognizing the fact that there's a power and an energy that's connected with the pyramid itself. And even if you could be close to a pyramid mountain, like Mount Kailash, in a certain sense, I know this organization particularly really likes Mount Kailash. Well, you know, the energy itself, just being there, being kind of pyramidal or geometric in that sense, creates this type of energy. And Professor Golog in Russia has shown that if you grow rice inside the pyramid and then you give those to the local prisoners, they actually become more pacifist.
This is one of his pictures.
And so the very structure of the pyramid itself is actually able to change, we'll say, consciousness or make a difference in the way we think.
But before we go too far,
and in healing, I should say,
we have to understand just showing a couple of pictures doesn't mean anything. This is why at Stanford Research Institute, there was a private conference in the 1980s with top scientists, geologists, mathematicians, physicists, and they looked at the other documentation sent back by not only the Mariner 9, but the Viking. As you will see here in this next exhibit, my finger points to that encircled object at the lower part of the page, two walls in parallel formation, very much similar to what Dr. Lambert Dolphins considered to be a replica of what we have in Dendra, Egypt. So at one point in the Greek Roman traditions, we simply accepted the fact that there were gods or cosmic civilizations. We would call them today cosmic engineers. Evolution doesn't stop with Mother Earth, it goes into the greater cosmos. And we are now living at a time of a, shall we say, return mission of the original programmers that use the pyramids as building blocks of information gathering, information processing, and also a mathematical clue as to how we would develop our own consciousness development.
I have a question. This document which Dr. JJ showed, is it released document? Is it available on NASA website, or it's something not published yet?
It was published in 1973 in my book, Giza Enoch, and you can acquire it by simply going to Amazon, ordering my book, Book of Knowledge, Keys of Enoch.
Well, you can find it as you Google, because it's called the Mariner 9 B-frames of pyramids on Mars.
We did the image enhancements.
It came out actually before the Viking probe of the face. So that's why this is an early picture. And people don't take it maybe as seriously as the face, because that got very popularized. But to be honest, that has more questions than answers, whereas this is very, very clear that there's these four structures. And that's why it's often called the Sagan Pyramid, because even Carl Sagan himself, as skeptical as he was, said, you know, these are interesting formations.
So this began a whole new journey for us with the release of the Pyramids on Mars pictures. We had the opportunity to journey to Egypt and do more extensive research. First of all, I want to show you the picture of the Giza Plateau, once again, the larger pyramids. And you can see in the foreground, the Japanese who created our artificial pyramids, suggesting that they could duplicate the Egyptians by the traditional use of manpower, the so-called sled, and pulleys. But the Japanese, back in the 1960s, were forced to admit that they were not able, without the use of helicopters and pneumatic pumps and devices, to do anything equivalent to the Great Pyramid. So we have to put this into perspective.
If we want to talk a little bit more about Mars for a few more minutes, actually, this is another thing that came out on the Mariner 9B frame, and this is called the Inca City. Now, of course, these are questions whether, you know, this could just be from wind erosion or ice erosion and water erosion, now that we know water existed. But it really does look like what was popularly called an Inca city up in the mountains. So, you know, people live there as well, in a different atmosphere. And we know changes take place to the atmospheric system. And how would you say water existed, flowing water existed on Mars? This is now really almost acceptable. In fact, water at some point even exists on the moon. And it's such a critical element for life. So we feel life is much more abundant and changes had taken place to the planet.
Wherever we have gone in the world, the pyramids have been connected with the water source underground, be it in Mexico and Yucatan, be it in Egypt proper, and even in the islands of the South Pacific, that the pyramids were built, if possible, on top of water sources. The water apparently created an energy vortex. And through the energy vortex, the pyramids could transmit levels of information, acoustical information. So we want to broaden our discussion. And Desiree has a picture from the Dresden Codex of the face of Mars.
It's interesting I'll try to hold this up like this. This is actually the face of the beast connected with Mars, according to the ancient Mayan cultures. And it was part of their astronomical table. Of course, they would have looked to Mars and they would have looked to Venus for some of their astronomical facts. But it's interesting that we feel that they actually understood more about Mars than
associated with the planet of war. Traditions of all major cultures associate Mars with war. So to me, this is an interesting aspect of how we take this information forward and avoid seeing, as it were, the extraterrestrial dimension as a negative, rather, should we say, a positive step forward.
And this was connected with pyramid complexes also in, we'll say, Guatemala. So there's lots that tie back into this planet. And so maybe it's time to start talking about pyramids around the world here. We had visited the Bosnian Pyramid. We're fascinated with Dr. Sam's research and from everything from underground tunnels, because our work in Egypt has to do with what's underground. We feel there's more underground in Egypt than there is even above the sands of Egypt. So we tie in with that as well.
But we noted that there were bioacoustical events inside the Bosnian pyramids, as well as underneath the pyramids of Egypt, where small bluish spheres of light would appear.
Yeah, so when we were in the tunnels, we actually had seen and caught on film some blue spheres, because it seems to be, there's an energy. I mean, let's just face it, for anyone who wants to know about pyramids, you know, we do feel there's this huge grid structure around the planet, most of which have been capped, we can say, by pyramid structures, temples, whatever you'd want to call them. Some of the things don't look as pyramidal as they would in Egypt and in Mexico, but nevertheless, they're structural temples.
As we see here in the acoustical patterns around my wife, as she is echoing certain mantric codes inside the Great Pyramid of Egypt. Those spheres are not commonplace. There are spheres within spheres. So there's a geometric pattern of acoustical physics that's connected with all of the Great Pyramids that's been completely overlooked by scientists. And we've done the mathematical, the musical, and the, should we say, the sacred physics of all of these major sites. And we've published this now in archaeological journals for those who are interested. There is a mathematical harmonic dealing with the pyramids. Unless you tap into this, your mind will not open to a higher dimension of resonance. Without that, you will not see the multidimensional aspects of how the Great Pyramid is a programming process or chamber, opening the heart, mind, and the higher mind or spirit to ongoing evolution.
Right, and the sad thing is we found that if they reconstruct, sometimes they want to fix the interior walls from falling apart or whatever. If they don't use the same materials that the structures were built with, they actually neutralize or ruin the acoustic function. And I don't know if any of you guys have gone to Tikal in Guatemala, but it's called the city of sound or city of music. And one of the amazing things is you could be having someone at the very base in the center square there, and someone could be way, 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 way high up on the pyramid, and you can hear each other talk. So, I mean, they clearly had sound as a linkage in what they were doing. But what we found is if you go inside the pyramids and you use certain vibrations, and I have to say, it's usually a male voice, sadly. It's a little bit more of like that Tibetan drone vibration, that you actually can get certain resonant patterns, which are like really puts you in a mental meditative state. As Dr. Hurtak had just shown you in terms of my picture in the King's Chamber of Egypt.
But even a better picture is this one I'm showing you right now, which is mystical test that we did inside the Great Pyramid, where the vibrations began to resonate at a certain frequency, and all of a sudden, what is called standing columnar waves appeared in the grand gallery of the Great Pyramid, and the whole room or chamber filled with golden light. So this is a musical impossibility unless there were musical factors programmed into the actual geometric structures of the pyramid. So this requires a whole textbook, and we've published several textbooks. So let's go on with the questions, because again, we can talk about things in the abstract.
Yes.
Dealings with more specifics.
Okay.
Yes. So I'm going to dial it back real quick, because that's, as you correctly stated, that's a lot of information to digest and very much welcomed, actually. But I would like to bring a point to our audience and then ask you guys for confirmation and or, negation of it. But pyramids, as we know of them as a shape, okay, it's not until recently that we've ascertained the ability to measure them at a micro level and to observe it as a geometrical shape at the macro level, correct?
Correct.
So when we're talking in terms of chronology or chronological order, these shapes aren't found normally in nature as nature appears on Earth. When we're talking in terms of patterns and similarities, so these man-made structures it is not a naturally occurring shape in nature unless you have the ability to observe them at the micro or macro. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, right. So basically, like I said, there is a pyramid in everything from our brain cells to H2O, but technically, and that's of course more of a Trinity structure. But if you look, even it's interesting because people look at the Great Pyramid, and they go, oh, this is beautiful 5-sided structure, 4 sides around, then the base. Actually, the Great Pyramid itself, when you look at it from space, they're starting to find little, it's actually almost an 8-sided structure. I don't know if you've heard about that, but to be able to manage the hugeness of that, it's actually a little bit concave in some of the
Each side is concave.
Yeah.
So when we were doing research in Egypt with colleagues in a small airplane flying around, we were able to use infrared photography and actually realize each of the 4 sides was divided in 2 parts. And so they're basically 8 sides.
Very, very minimal, but it gives the structure its ability. And then you go to other places and places like Cholula, which is the largest pyramid in the world of Mexico. And it's definitely a pyramid. I mean, and you can go inside and they have cobalt altars, which is what the Mayans did, a little like when you walk in and they're kind of, it's pyramid over your head, so to speak. But it's a big, massive mud structure, but actually it's a pyramid structure.
So this would imply a type of higher physics involved that was not commonly known until recent times.
Well, I think the main thing is why the structure. And as I mentioned, first and foremost, I think everyone has to accept it's a very solid piece of geometry. It's very it doesn't move that easily. It's very, very solid. No matter what's going on with, we'll say earthquakes, because there are earthquakes actually everywhere. Many of the places that there is. Look at Mexico City, for example. I mean, those pyramids have been there for a long time, and it's all on a mud base. The main pyramids of the sun and moon, it's a huge mud-based lake that was constructed there. But anyway, the idea is that it's a very solid geometry. But we also feel that it puts out an energy frequency. And whether it's the pyramidal cells in our brains or anything else that has that structure, this is exactly what Patrick Flanagan, I encourage everyone to read his early books, talk about the energy of the pyramid is a natural energy. According to Professor Golok, maybe it's just the structure around a circle. Our sphere of the earth is a circle. You create these pyramids, you disrupt, so to speak, the energy flow of that circle, and you're able to create a focal point of new energy direction.
When we were doing research inside the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid, which is the central room, the star shafts, one going to Orion, one going to the circumpolar stars, the North Pole, allowed us to have electrifying experiences. So there seems to be an acoustical physics that is there in the nature of the pyramidal design to awaken us to our cosmic potential.
Yeah, I actually, when we were doing these chanting and things, I had the walls drop away from me and it looked like I was out in the night sky. And I'm not the only one that's had that experience, actually. A friend of mine 3 years later, I totally forgot I had mentioned it, he had the exact same thing. There seems to be this energy charge connected with being at certain places inside the pyramids themselves that allow your consciousness to tap in. Dr. Hurtak calls them chrono monitors. We feel that like we're sending and receiving information. Mothers know this, they can pick up on their kids and stuff. We are actually biotransducers in a certain sense of energy, that the pyramids are also able to be sending certain frequencies out around the globe.
The next exhibit I want to show you is a group of Egyptian guides on top of the Great Pyramid. All of a sudden they begin to dance. No one knows why they're dancing, but we were doing a musical acoustical test inside the pyramid right below where they were. And the pyramid, of course, is an activator of the energies that are accumulated towards the top. And so the guides naturally began to dance atop the pyramid because they felt this tremendous energy vortex from below inside the King's Chamber coming to the top. So we were exploring the mathematical, the musical, the sociological, the psychological, the theological, and that's been the problem, is the pyramids on, for our all intensive purposes, have been restricted only to archeologists. And the other disciplines have been overlooked. We have to bring all of the specialists together in order to make, as it were, the great ascension, the great transformation possible. So again, I appreciate your questions. Let's move on now, because one of the questions Desiree had to deal with was environment issues inside the pyramids. Do the pyramids reflect also situations of cataclysmic change, or what could be called climate events?
Well, maybe this question will lead into it, though, not to interrupt you, because it to us, it goes hand in hand, especially with the information we've ascertained from you, your books, many other authors who have said the same thing, that it is a interdisciplinary approach where we work together to discover the function. That being said, and taking into account the different vibrations and what we know of different states of consciousness or altered states of consciousness and their measurable frequencies, do you believe that a human can serve as an operator to activate the pyramids for any sort of purpose, especially in relation to bringing out that effect, as you guys mentioned, with the people jumping with joy, and with an aspect to climate change or cataclysmic events? Can a human being serve as an operator of that energy?
Well, let's take it slowly. So first of all, I love the movie Stargate, and I wouldn't put it past being somewhat real that that certain people with the right consciousness can actually activate certain aspects, we'll say, of the pyramid itself. I think that's one of the valid situations. I think we can all do this. I think we all have that ability. But when we limit ourselves and say, oh, we can't, then we start blocking ourselves. So intention is really, really important. And we do feel that we are aligned with the pyramids around us. We ourselves, actually, you were asking about the geometry. Well, you know, if we sit in a state of meditation, cross our legs like they tell you to do in India, and you put your, you know, your heads at the top, you're actually creating a perfect pyramid geometry yourself. And so I think that's part of it. And we often tell people, because we travel around the world, you don't have to go to Egypt. You don't have to go to Mexico, you know, or even the sacred sites near you. And they're starting to be found, as you know, all over the world. But basically, you can tune into those areas and activate. Now, with that said, we do feel that there is an activation of the grid structure on the planet taking place right now. So, and, you know, we're right now in the Southwest. Well, there's a lot of sacred, we'll say they're not necessarily pyramids, but there's a lot of ancient temple areas, a lot of ancient kivas that are being activated at this time in the Southwest. And there are pyramids, strange enough, in our United States, especially in the area of, I think, well, definitely Minnesota. And we've been to the pyramids right outside St. Louis. So if you live
Central America,
yeah, but even outside St. Louis, Missouri, is a
so
huge
there has been a natural understanding throughout history, both in China, India, countries of the Near East and of Europe, that the Mother Earth is interconnected with strange geometric forms. The principle, of course, is the pyramidal geometry.
Right. And so Cahokia is the one right outside of St. Louis. There's ancient Indian mounds, but they're clearly pyramids. In fact, there's a couple of them there. So I would highly recommend anyone in the US and the Midwest to go take a look at that. And then, you know, we've also gone down to the area of Peru and Machu Picchu. We've gone to Bolivia. So we've been there even at the sacred ceremony times of the solstice and the equinoxes to go to the area of...
so there's a natural biorhythm that the human body has. The indigenous people perform this solar dance or sun dance ritual, the high of the mountains in Ecuador, Colombia, and Peru.
And Bolivia.
To indicate that we are part of an ongoing natural rhythm.
So why do they do this? I mean, why are these key structures, why are they even placed there? Well, we think that the planet itself is kind of a grid network. Like we have what we call acupuncture lines in our system. Dr. Hurtak actually takes those lines and calls them axiotonal lines and takes them out to the stars. So we think the whole planet is a part of a greater grid structure, and we're all playing a role. We all can add energy to the system, and the pyramids are key nodal points on the grid structure to help activate for positive, or if we're so choose, for negative changes taking place. But you know, it's kind of the structure. It's this grid structure, and that's what literally the Keys of Enoch had. This is what Dr. Hurtak saw as one, that there's actually key structures. I'll put it above my head here. One of the aspects. But what's interesting is he also saw, in addition to that, that the whole planet historically is part of a greater structure. Here's another map in his book, The Keys of Enoch.
It was published in 1973, and of those 12 areas, 9 of the 12 have been confirmed as having pyramidal locations under the ocean, or in the deserts of Central Asia, and or in the Americas. So
right, so this gets really exciting. So one of the grid points in there is the Azore Islands, and you know, now it's clearly recognized, you can Google it, that the Azores, middle of nowhere, so to speak, in the Atlantic, have pyramids. And then another place in there, which we think is extremely important, is the Mauritius. These are islands off of Africa that recently, and again, you can Google this because now things are coming out of the news, the Mauritius has 7, we'll say, pyramid temple structures that some drone system was able to fly around and take pictures of. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, we're
let me just inject this for the sake of new people watching this. We have a film called Merkaba, Voyage of a Starseed. And in this film, we go to Egypt. We go to the different levels of mathematical change that it takes place along the temples of the Nile, with each temporal frequency, there is a different geometric form that involves how the human mind is working with new creative insights. So if you can take time and order this, it's now a CD, Merkaba Voyage of a Starseed DVD, I'm sorry, DVD. It will bring you into an experience of going along the Nile and going through these different pyramidal chambers. And that'll do more than 10,000 pages of mathematics, which is fine, but you need to have experience. Otherwise, we're talking about the abstract rather than the real.
Anyway, so you have a few more questions?
Yeah, we would like you to, answer the questions about climate. So one of the other hosts here are going to ask you guys that. I just wanted to provide you feedback because I love the answers so far. It's beautiful, well articulated, and thorough, covering a lot of areas for people to look here and look there. And you've even shown a little bit from your book, The Keys of Enoch, right? That to me, that shape you shown kind of reminds me of the lotus flower petals. It's really interesting. And then you jump right into the Nile, and at the tip of the Nile, it actually looks like the flower of life. So it's really interesting to me. So thank you both so much for your answers.
Thank you for your insights.
All right, next question.
Yes, Dr. Desiree, you have been involved in climate research, and why do you think the pyramids have been built on tectonic faults? And do you think that they could somehow help us mitigate the the increasing global cataclysms?
Well, clearly the pyramids are part of a larger grid structure. And in terms of the environment, I think that they are warning signs that we are sending out signals that we are having a problem. Our environment right now is almost at a state of collapse. We're right now in the Southwest, and there's what's not only called a drought, but it's called a mega drought. And if we don't get rain, it's a serious situation. And we have too much flooding in Alaska, too little rain in the Southwest. There's major situations. So what are we going to do? Well, we actually feel that the pyramids themselves are solutions to some of our possibilities. First of all, not only are they in some areas connected with earthquakes, but I do feel that those are pretty much everywhere around the world. But oftentimes, and this is more unique, the pyramid itself is positioned over water. Now, one would ask the question, why would you ever build a large, strong structure over water? And the question is, well, Tesla wanted to do a similar thing. He actually, on his Tesla transmission tower, actually wanted to have water underneath because it seems to be some sort of conduit energy possibility. So that turns us, and it gets a little bit away from climate change, but actually to solutions for climate change. And that is to Dr. Hurtak and mine and our associates, James Brown, who's a contractor in Colorado. It's a book called Giza's Industrial Complex. And actually what it's saying is that we believe the ancients actually could have used in Egypt thousands of years ago a method to make hydrogen energy. And if we would even use that simple technology today, we can solve a lot of our planetary problems.
As we see here in this diagram that Desiree has made.
Yes, we see actually the ability to make a water cell in operation. It's simple. It's a cathode and an anode. And actually, there was a whole company out of Carnegie Mellon that was actually making a similar structure. And you know what they used to separate the, we'll say the anode and the cathode? They used cotton. Well, cotton is #1 in Egypt. Egyptian cotton, everyone's heard about. It doesn't take much to use hydrogen, especially to make green hydrogen versus blue hydrogen, because green hydrogen is the natural form. In fact, Stanford University has actually even said you can use salt water to produce hydrogen energy. You have to protect the anodes and cathodes from corrosion, but other than that, it makes a very, very, very efficient system. So where was salt water in Egypt? Well, there's a whole lake called Lake Morris. That was a saltwater lake. So, you know, let's shift. Let's get rid of the old technology let's start moving. And I know Europe is doing it, pro-Europe, yeah, for going into hydrogen. Some countries, I think, yeah, even Iceland and some of the other ones want to do complete hydrogen very, very quickly, and they should. Simple.
But can you imagine hydrogen production was taking place underground in Egypt? And we found evidence also of saltwater batteries. We found other evidence of hydraulic water systems that the Egyptians were utilizing as an energy source. So there was 3 or 4 areas that we were able to systematically investigate with the permission of the Egyptian authorities over the last 30 years.
And, you know, you think that, and most people go into the Great Pyramid and they go, oh, you know, here's the King's Chamber, here's the Queen's Chamber, you know, a couple things like that.
And all it is there for Japanese tourists or American tourists. That's absurd.
But they recently just opened the ancient, what they consider the very first pyramid, the Zoser Pyramid. That's supposed to be, you know, the primitive thing. They put a brick here and then they made these steps and things like that. Has anyone ever looked inside? This is the inside of the Zoser, simple old pyramid, right? Wrong. Basically, it's like an industrial system, and they just opened it to people. They don't show them everything. They show them some of it. It's amazing. It's an industrial complex. They could easily have not only stored hydrogen gas, which is what we're proposing as well, but they also could have manufactured it. All you need is sun. All you need is metals. We know now, even in those little star shafts that go out to Orion and to, we'll say, Draconis, that they found metal little handles in the middle of nowhere, so to speak, up these little teeny star shafts. They had metals, they had cotton, they had water, they had sun. What do you take? That's all you need. And that's all we need to start making hydrogen energy and change our problems as well.
So we were able to explore more than 3 miles of underground passages, the whole Giza Plateau, and came up with an enormous database of information showing that there was not one alternative energy system, but 3 or 4 the Egyptians were utilizing probably as a school blueprint for future civilizations on Mother Earth.
So one of the things Dr. Hurtak's saying is we used remote sensing technology. These are these equipment that you can take down or do it on the surface, actually.
Here we were exploring
underneath
and finding the tomb of Osiris in 1997. You're seeing my hand pointing to the lid of the tomb of Osiris. We were the first to uncover that. And Osiris is like the musician, the key scientist of ancient Egypt. So when we found the lid of this tomb, it meant that a whole new dimension of Egyptology was about to be exposed. And we feel that we're on this course now. In spite of the politics of the Middle East, eventual truth will prevail and that people will come together as a team. Essential in this will be the researchers that have research work that's been done by the Polish archaeological team, which we're a member of. The Russian research, the Czech team has done fantastic work in Abu Sir. The Slovakian researchers, all of East Europe is involved in this major opportunity to open up the back door to planetary history through Egypt.
So just to continue a little bit more with the hydrogen, what we found when we went into the tomb of Osiris, and one of the reasons that it's been so blocked for a while, is that actually water comes up from the Nile and flows underneath, and we believe it goes all the way underneath the pyramid itself. So it's hard to get down there, but the tomb of Osiris is at a kind of a crossroads close to the Great Pyramid, and it was full of water. So there's a unique water course, and recently also if you go to Chichen Itza in Mexico, they actually recently found water underneath that pyramid. Now there's cenotes nearby, so you'd wonder, okay, put all the water to the cenote, but no, there's actually water underneath the main pyramid of Chichen Itza. So they understood this. And if you don't want to if you want to say it's just ritual, you can say it's just ritual, that's fine. And we do believe rituals are important and that the pyramids were used for ritual as well. Like we said, sounds, frequencies and vibrations are important, but still the water itself was key.
So to simplify, the pyramid is the most perfect structure to survive a geological change or tumble. It maintains its balance. The pyramid is the most logical place to look to for the preservation of ancient knowledge, as we found in Göbekli Tepe in eastern Turkey, as we have found in Egypt. More often than not, ancient documents were sequestered underneath the pyramids because they were considered to be, as it were, the most perfect place of preservation. And finally, the pyramids themselves operate through a type of high-speed connectiveness that we have yet to explore and to understand. It shows that there is a world transmission system built between the pyramids of the planet, all the way from China to Mexico, all the way from northern Canada to Chile and Argentina. There's a worldwide grid system of communication that seems to be, should we say, preparing us for major planetary change.
Yeah, if I can also say, when you talk about planetary change, we've been to Bolivia, to Punapumpo, to Hayamaca, to actually all the pyramidal sites in that area. And what we did find was, in addition to the pyramids themselves, they actually understood how to grow food at these high altitudes, 14,000 feet. I guess that's like something like 3,000 to 4,000 meters high. And they did it by actually a type of solar energy system that they actually put water running through.
Solar energy reflection.
Yeah. So that they actually preserved in the night, the water kept the plants warm. It's an amazing phenomenon. NASA noticed it. No one else could see it because they could only see it from outer space. But they actually were able to grow food at high altitudes in ancient times because they made this kind of solar water system.
So we're at a very amazing time, both in terms of planetary change as well as planetary discovery, both in terms of looking beyond the old traditions that do not answer the basic questions of life. Why are these geometric forms so amazing and repeatable? And of course, we're coming now to other questions that we think are very important for our listening audience. And that is, where do we go with this new information? It means that we need a worldwide commons, a new communication network. I call it a university without walls, electronic university that can publish this information that has been restricted in the past because it's too basic in one area of geology or archaeology and is not sufficient in terms of the psychological interest of young people. But we need a global commons. We need each of you who are part of this discussion today to realize that new information is pushing the envelope forward. And we're about to make some great breakthroughs in the understanding of the power of the mind, which, I can say this publicly, next to the splitting of the atom, the realization that our mind is local and non-local is the greatest breakthrough since the splitting of the atom. And it's in our book with Dr. Elizabeth Rauscher.
Anyway, yes, and so the pyramid is part of that consciousness linkage that we all share. Can we have some questions? Another question.
I have so many comments. Thank you very much for sharing this information. And I guess first, I would really like to thank you for this book about the Giza complex, because I was reading it, and as a specialist in chemical engineering, I was so amazed on the level of research and like these findings that you found, and this, like, to me, it's like reverse engineering, which you proposed. It absolutely makes sense, and it is absolutely great finding of a simple system. So in addition to that, I totally agree with you about the role of hydrogen and the hydrogen economy, and basically like knowing what is going on in the hydrogen economy field. I can say that the government of Korea put in a lot of money to the hydrogen economy, and then also the development of the hydrogen-based cars is really, it's nowadays thing, and it is like it's going as successful as electric cars. They are not that well known, but essentially we have infrastructure to use hydrogen, but we don't really have like this source of energy, because to split water you always have, and you propose really brilliant ideas how that can be realized. So thank you very much for this part, and it is really amazing and so exciting how you're sharing this information. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I also want to point out in our book, this is Giza's Industrial Complex, we talk about the Dendera light bulb. This is what most people are familiar with. And Eric von Daniken was able to show that with just a type of gas system, you can actually light that. And he did that at a friend of ours museum, actually in Austria. But in addition to that, at Dendera was also this lake. And there's some ideas that people would actually go there for healing, because it could be what we would call as energized water. So we talked about the pyramid, and it really, if you energize certain types of water, like you see from Dr. Emoto and other situations, and the Russians have actually talked about this energized water quite a bit, that you can actually have your own experiences. So if you not only so people say, well, you know, okay, hydrogen, what did they use it for? Obviously, the people didn't use hydrogen in Egypt, but the priesthood, they could have used it for agriculture. That's another thing. The Egyptians had fantastic agriculture. If you had used this water, hydrogen energized water for agriculture, it would have been fantastic. You can also do it for health, as an elixir, and this is what I'm talking about here as well. So there are many ways of also using hydrogen, which we're starting to develop right now as well, and oxyhydrogen gas to create more of an energy technology. So there's so much, and let's just hope that we move quickly into that hydrogen society.
And what we found were the small little openings at the bottom of many of the tombs and the vessels, indicating a recycling process was intended.
Right, so a lot of the sarcophagi that we'll say, you know, basically there have been no, we'll say actual people found dead in the actual sarcophaguses in most of the very ancient structures. So we feel, and this is what even the ancient scroll of Asclepius said, basically they weren't tombs, they were temples. They were places of storage, they were places of, we'll say, you know, even storing hydrogen gas.
If I can quote this, because as a student of ancient Coptic literature, it's so amazing. This is what is said in Asclepius. He said, Egypt was once the schoolhouse of the gods, but now it has become the tombs for the corpses. Egypt has lost its spiritual understanding of its destiny, and the gods have fled to the sky. So we believe that those ancient mystical writings would be the equivalent of cosmic civilization that was visiting our solar system at one time, leaving behind the clues of our own process of becoming more mature with the vast opportunities of what the ancients referred to as the Adam and Eve story of why we are incarnate beings on this planet with the ability to have cosmic resonance, not only of the fourth and fifth dimension, but even higher dimensions.
In our work in South America, Tiahuanaco and other places, we actually trace some of this, you know, where did the technology come from? I mean, it's always a question, right? We actually traced it back a little bit also to the Far East. And there seems to be a lot of legends in the Far East. And Dr. Hurtak actually spent time in an area called Yanaguni, and that's in southern Japan, where there seems to be this sunken temple. And this became known on the History Channel, both in Australia and the US, that there had been previous cultures that existed. And then when actually our planet went through climate change, basically, it wasn't the fact that, you know, there was a flood, but basically what happened is the ice at the North and South Pole tended to melt, it seems, and water levels rose. So at some point, I hate to say this for the Japanese, but it seems that in ancient times, the Japan was associated or closer to China, that it was perhaps even one whole part of a continent. And we feel that when water levels were lower, you could actually travel from parts of the Pacific, and this is what Thor Heyerdahl has shown, over to places like Tahiti, Easter Island, and then from Easter Island over to South America. And when you look at the temples in Tiahuanaco and other places in Peru, you find similar structures to what you'll find in Japan. And these are from really an ancient previous time before our 6,000 years of history.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And you know, I would like to change gears a little bit and get back to what you said some time ago, that we are presented with a multitude of thoughts and we can choose freely from, that we can have we can have an effect on the world around us depending on the choices we make, like towards positivity or negativity. And we totally support this point of view. And we also think there is a relationship between these phenomena and global planetary cataclysmic events, which can be mitigated with the help of the ancient pyramidal structures. We would like to know what you think on this topic.
Well, to me, you're right on spot. You call it spot on in terms of the logic of why we're talking today on all of this enormous knowledge that's suddenly made available to us. We're not to sit on it and to overlook its implications, but to re-energize ourselves, what I will call a better future science. Future science is science guided by consciousness. Future science is science that is human-oriented rather than object-oriented. Future science shows the multidimensional aspects of life. We're all interconnected, and this is a time that world cultures must come together through this great historic information that has also clues to our future survival and build a new functional database. And again, Desiree and I have been able to work with the Japanese in publishing a documentary called The Temple of Mu, M-U, that deals with the underwater structures that were found off of Yonaguni back in the 1990s. So we have a plethora of film documents we would like to make available to you watching this program and our colleagues throughout the world, so that we can move forward in terms of the time, the critical time that we have on Earth.
Right. So we have two websites. One's called futurescience.org and the other is keysofenoch.org. I just like to talk about consciousness for a minute on the Mind Dynamics book. You know, we actually were able to tap into places around the world with our good friend Elizabeth Rauscher. And one of the places we tapped into was Egypt. So Dr. Hurtak and I were out in Egypt with associates, and she was remote viewing all the way to where we were. And she's very, very accurate in some of the stuff. Let me just show you, or in all of the stuff, I should say. So here's Dr. Hurtak walking at the university.
Cairo.
And so here's also what she picked up, the light bulb, as you can kind of see there, that she was accurate to be able to do that.
Over 6,000 kilometers away without giving any information. He was able to tap into us and actually give the number of people walking by the lecture hall, the color of the doors of the lecture hall, as well as the embellishments in the structure of this ancient light system.
And although she could have done this everywhere, she was in Phoenix, and we were like thousands. It
shows the power of the mind as part of a global mind, that we have the ability without the use of technology to actually go to places and explore this rather inexpensively.
And we've done this all over the world. We've also, not only for that, but we've also done what we would call prayers for peace. So we've had, when things build up in a particular area, we always encourage people, you know, you are your own pyramid. Send out that energy. Don't ever feel that you are incapacitated or, you know, living somewhere in an isolated place and no one, you know, you have no influence to anything. We've worked with Lynn Taggart, who talks about the power of 8. Intention can make a difference. And if we tune into the World Grid Network, which is what we're talking about with the pyramids, we're even enhanced by that, but we don't have to physically go there. We can use the power of the mind to tap into that grid network we're talking about, because we have pyramidal cells in our brain. They're able to teleportate, so to speak, or send energy, just like the pyramid itself, to any part of the globe.
Well, we're talking about hundreds of scientific papers that we have written with our associates. So again, for those who are joining us interested in chemistry and in environmental science, This is the book, Giza's Industrial Complex, for those interested in mathematics and parapsychology. This is the book.
Or mind dynamics, to be able to influence, to know what's going on around you, even if you don't see it. Remote viewing, that's different from remote sensing. Remote sensing uses the technology. Remote viewing uses your brain, but to look somewhere beyond your third dimensional limitation.
And for those looking beyond the historic dimensions and the metaphysical, this is the book, The Keys of Enoch, where the name of God is the blueprint of our genetic code. A complete upside down understanding of intellectual history and religious history that have solidified information in areas that do not work.
Is being changed right now.
We've demythologized and reactivated certain concepts on more of a universal level of knowledge.
And the pyramid is key to that, whether it's within us or on the grids around the planet. We're all part of that greater network of life, and we can all influence. So again, our emphasis is to influence on a positive way the planet to help transform it. Whether you want to physically go somewhere or not, you can still put your power to work.
Yes, actually, I wanted to, because you said the pyramid inside of us, and you talked about the fact that our construction comes from higher dimensions, and so the ways of life, the information of life come from higher dimensions. Is it related to sacred geometry of the pyramids, or how can we imagine this?
Well, psychologists and anthropologists do agree that most of what we create in the external world comes from the geometry inside of our brain, our neurological network. And so it could be said that the human evolution is playing out sacred structures of geometries already embedded within us that connect the harmonics of the different organs, the different processes of information. So it's clear that we're rediscovering ourselves, as what Desiree said, biotransducers, that we are biocomputers, but we have also other functions of information.
Right, and so if you also take the understanding of string theory, which I know a lot of people don't accept, but there's also M theory and other aspects, they're starting to see that these other dimensional realities are required, we'll say, for the theory of everything. How do we get here? And so in a certain sense, we're following some of this research and saying that the tetrahedron, not just the pyramid, because the pyramid itself for the most part is this five-sided structure on the ground that most people look at, but the tetrahedron is the basic building blocks of life. Now, how did that form? Well, probably it is this multidimensional reality that's not limited to our third/fourth dimensional reality. So we exist in length with height. Einstein talked about time, the fourth dimension, but what happens beyond that? And it seems that the geometry behind all that is the tetrahedron.
Which means we can be involved in endless time through contemplation.
Right, and so that's the theory, actually.
Hyperspace reality.
Behind this book, Elizabeth Rauscher talked about, this is part of her theory, of taking the fourth dimension, which is time, into doubling it, making it into the eighth. So she would call it eighth space. Because the thing is with remote viewing.
This would be consistent with Minkowski's concept of basic math.
But what she found was that sometimes people even have precognition, which means you know things before they happen. Well, that means you have to be going beyond the fourth dimension. If you go beyond the fourth dimension, you have to go to a space where time is kind of like, even Einstein said, like a river, where you have past, present, and future all flowing together. And at that point, you have a different reality. You have an eight-dimensional, at least an eight-dimensional structure in her mathematics. And that's what we came out with this book. How do you explain precognition? How do you explain remote viewing, being able to see another place on the planet? These people were not—
Quite shocking. It's quite shocking that the American Academy of Science at first was very reluctant to publish the Stanford Research Institute's studies. But we have really, in this book, the real X-Files.
What they found is that they weren't like sitting here and going, oh, I'm going to go mentally to Egypt and then come back from Egypt and see what I saw there. They didn't, that would have been a time delay. What they do, what the top researchers of remote viewing did, is they were instantaneously in the consciousness field in Egypt. And she says you can only do that by working with 8-dimensional reality. So that's where also the whole idea of pyramidal structures and the function of the brain come in. Anyway, it's quite complex, and there's more and more science still to be developed in this field.
One last very short question. I'm sorry. And this is about the approach of all the scientists, all the archaeologists that you've already mentioned. The international public movement, ALLATRA, strives to develop a creative society. We've been interviewing millions of people all around the world throughout the last 9 years. And we've been asking them in what society they would like to live. And all of the people said that they would like to live in a society where the human being would be in the center of attention, where the society would not be consumer like it is now because it leads to a deadlock, but it would be constructive. It would basically lead to development of a personality. And saying that from your point of view as a scientist, what can every one of us do to support this shift into from the consumer vector of society into the creative and constructive vector of society? What can every scientist, what can every archaeologist do to do this?
Well, this is we call the $64,000 question. The most important question is to seeing that we are a holistic creation, a holistic person that doesn't need plastic civilization, that we must engineer a whole new set of priorities that are human-based, human in service, and human in explorations of the spirit, of the heart, mind, and the greater intelligence. In short, it means we must remove ourselves from what I call the unholy trinity of competition, acquisition, and consumption that has destroyed much of world society. That we simply take, and do not restore or understand the subtle mechanisms of Mother Earth, which is a living organism we are part of. And to that end of a refreshing new image of humanity, let us go forward to be heart-oriented rather than material-oriented. And thus the dialectic of the old is overcome. The East and the West is overcome. That which is super capitalism or super communism is overcome. We are free ultimately to be beings of eternity in human form. So we want to thank all of you, Anastasia, Alex, all of you who have been with us on this very important sharing across the world. And we're just beginning to, shall we say, activate our engines of new information. So we'll be available for conference calls with you in the future.